The great Threxian fleet drifted through space, lost and broken. Once, their people had lived on a beautiful homeworld with grand cities, powerful technology, and a history full of achievements. Now, all of that was gone. The Gothran Dominion, a ruthless empire, had erased their entire civilization. Their cities were destroyed, their records wiped from history, and their people hunted down like criminals. Only a few thousand Threxians remained, living on old and damaged ships. They had been running for many years, always hiding, always afraid. They had no home, no allies, and no future. Most of the galaxy had forgotten they even existed. Elder Valus, one of the last leaders of the Threxians, sat in the dark control room of the main ship, Eldoris Hope. His tired eyes stared at the holographic map in front of him. Every red-marked system on the map meant danger. Every blue-marked system was controlled by enemies. There was nowhere left to run. His second-in-command, Ravis, stepped forward. "Elder, we cannot run forever," he said. "Our food supplies are running low. Half of our ships have failing engines. If we don't find help soon, we will die in the dark." Valus let out a deep sigh. He knew Ravis was right. The Threxians had survived by staying hidden, but they couldn't keep running forever. "There is one place," Valus said slowly. He pressed a button, and a new system appeared on the map. A small yellow star with a single blue planet. Long ago, before our people fell, we had records of a species called humans. They were young and not very advanced at that time, but they had something different. They were stubborn. They fought against the impossible. They never gave up. Ravis frowned. Humans? The last time we checked, they were not important in the galactic stage. They had no power, no influence. How can they help us? Valus gave a weak smile. That was many years ago. A race like them does not remain weak forever. If they have survived, they may be our last hope. Ravis hesitated but nodded. There were no other choices. Either they reached out for help, or they waited to die. "Set a course for Sol system," Valus ordered. "Let's see if humanity still exists." The journey took weeks. The Threxian ships, barely holding together, pushed forward through empty space. As they neared the Sol system, they sent out a distress signal in all known human languages. They did not know what to expect. Would the humans help them? Or would they, like so many others, turn them away? The answer came sooner than expected. Before the fleet could reach Earth's orbit, dozens of Terran Defense Force warships surrounded them. Human ships were sleek and deadly, their weapons locked onto the Threxian fleet. A deep voice came through the communication channel. "This is Captain Elias Carter of the Terran Defense Forces. Unknown fleet, you have entered restricted space. Identify yourselves immediately." Valus stepped forward and spoke with calm respect. "Captain Carter, I am Elder Valus of the Threxian Remnant. Our people are refugees. We come seeking help from humanity." There was silence on the other side. The humans were thinking, calculating. It was clear they were not a race that made quick, foolish decisions. Finally, Carter responded. "You have one chance to prove you are not a threat. Power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. If this is a trick, you will not live to regret it." Valus nodded. "We understand." The Threxians powered down their ships, and human boarding teams arrived. Armored soldiers marched onto the Threxian vessels, scanning everything with careful, trained eyes. Valus saw them up close for the first time. Humans were smaller than Threxians, but their eyes were sharp and filled with purpose. These were not the weak creatures the galaxy had once ignored. The lead human soldier, a woman named Lieutenant Sarah Voss, looked at the struggling refugees. She turned to her commander and spoke softly but firmly. "Sir, these people are starving. They're not a threat." Captain Carter nodded slowly. "Then let's hear their story." Valus felt a spark of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, humanity was exactly what they had been looking for. Captain Elias Carter sat in the command room of his warship, TDS Valiant, watching the holographic display of the Threxian fleet. Their ships were in terrible condition, scorched hulls, flickering lights, and engines barely holding together. The Threxians were not warriors anymore. They were survivors. Across from him, Elder Valus stood with his second-in-command, Ravis. Their posture was proud, but Carter could see the exhaustion in their eyes. They had been running for a long time. "You claim to be the last of your kind," Carter said. His voice was calm, but firm. "You say the Gothran Dominion erased your people from history. Why would they do that?" Valus sighed. "Because we refused to kneel," he said simply. He took a deep breath and began to explain. Centuries ago, the Threxians had been a thriving civilization, known for their knowledge, art, and technology. But when the Gothran Dominion rose to power, they demanded that all species serve them or be destroyed. The Threxians resisted. "At first we fought well," Valus continued, "but the Dominion was merciless. They turned our allies against us. They erased our records from history. They hunted our people like animals. Now, we are all that remains." Carter listened carefully. He had heard of the Gothran before. The Dominion was powerful, aggressive, and feared across the galaxy. But wiping out an entire species, destroying every trace of their existence, that was something else. "Why come to us?" Carter asked. "Humanity isn't exactly the most powerful race in the galaxy." Valus gave a small, tired smile. "Power does not come from size, Captain. It comes from spirit." The elder stepped forward and met Carter's gaze. "Many years ago, before our fall, we studied young races. We watched them rise and fall. We saw species that were strong but arrogant. We saw others that were wise but afraid to act." Then Valus' voice softened. "But humans were different. You had no great fleets, no mighty weapons, yet you fought against the impossible. You stood against forces stronger than you. You defied empires that should have crushed you. We believe that if any race could change the fate of the galaxy, it would be yours." Carter exchanged glances with Lieutenant Sarah Voss, who stood beside him. It was true. Humanity had a reputation. They were not the strongest, nor the most advanced, but they had something the galaxy feared. They never gave up. For a long moment, Carter was silent. Then he turned to his officers. "Get our medical teams on their ships," he ordered. "Send engineers to help stabilize their fleet. We'll take them to New Terra for proper aid." Valus blinked in surprise. "You mean you will help us?" Carter nodded. "We don't abandon those in need." A flicker of relief and gratitude crossed the elder's face. For the first time in years, the Threxians were no longer alone. A dangerous truth. The human fleet escorted the Threxians to New Terra, a major human colony. As they entered the planet's orbit, Valus and Ravis were brought to meet Chancellor Adrian Locke, the leader of the Terran Alliance. The Chancellor listened carefully as the Threxians told their story again. When Valus finished, Locke leaned back in his chair, deep in thought. "This is a dangerous situation," Locke said. "If we take you in, the Gothran Dominion will see it as an act of war." Valus nodded. "I understand. That is why we do not beg for protection. We only ask for a chance to rebuild." Locke considered this. "The Dominion erased your history once. If they find out you still exist, they will try again." Carter, who had been silent, finally spoke. "Then we make sure they fail." Locke raised an eyebrow. "You're suggesting we stand against the Gothran?" Carter crossed his arms. "We already know what the Dominion is. They rule through fear. They destroy anyone who resists. If we let them do this to the Threxians, who's next? Another race, one of our own colonies." There was silence in the room. Everyone knew Carter was right. Then Locke sighed. "If we do this, we must do it carefully. We can't rush into war, but we won't turn our backs on the innocent either." He looked at Valus. "From this moment on, the Threxians are under Terran protection." Valus closed his eyes. his shoulders relaxing for the first time in years. The Threxians had finally found a home. But deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. For the first time in years, the Threxians had a home. Humanity had welcomed them, given them food, shelter, and medical care. On New Terra, the once starving refugees were now breathing fresh air, walking under a bright sun, and feeling something they had long forgotten: hope. Elder Valus stood on a high balcony, overlooking the human city below. Buildings stretched into the sky, ships flew smoothly through the air, and people, humans and Threxians alike, walked the streets together. It was something he never thought he would see. Ravis, his second-in-command, joined him. "It feels strange," Ravis admitted. "To be safe, to not be running." Valus nodded. "Strange, but good." Just then, a chime sounded. A message had arrived from the Terran Defense Command. Valus and Ravis were summoned to meet Chancellor Adrian Locke and Captain Elias Carter. A dangerous decision. In the Grand Conference Hall, Chancellor Locke sat at the head of the table, while Captain Carter stood beside him. High-ranking human officials and military officers were present. Valus and Ravis took their seats. Locke spoke first. "The Gothran Dominion has learned that the Threxians still exist." The words hung in the air like a storm cloud. Valus clenched his fists. "Then they will come," he said. "They will finish what they started." Carter's expression was serious. "That's why we must be ready." He tapped a console, and a holographic map appeared, showing multiple red-marked ships heading toward human space. "These are Gothran scout ships," Carter explained. "They haven't reached New Terra yet, but they're looking. It won't be long before they find you." A tense silence filled the room. Then Locke leaned forward. "The Terran Alliance has made a decision. From this day forward, the Threxians are under our protection. If the Dominion wants to finish what they started, they will have to go through us." Valus felt a wave of emotion. For so long, the Threxians had been forgotten, abandoned. But now, humanity had made a promise to stand with them, to fight for them. Ravis, however, was skeptical. "The Gothran are powerful. Their fleet is massive. You would risk war for us." Carter smirked. "We don't scare easy." Locke nodded. "We are not seeking war, but we won't run from one either." He turned to Valus. "Your people are strong, but you have been in hiding for too long. If we are to stand together, the Threxians must be ready to fight." Valus stood tall. "Then we will fight." Preparing for battle. Over the next few weeks, human engineers and scientists worked with Threxian survivors to restore their old technology. The Threxians once had powerful starships, and though much was lost, some knowledge remained. In human shipyards, new warships were being built, a mix of Threxian and human technology. These ships were stronger, faster, and deadlier than anything either species had built before. At the same time, Threxian warriors trained alongside human soldiers. Though weakened from years of running, the Threxians had once been mighty fighters. With human weapons, armor, and tactics, they became warriors once again. One such warrior, Commander Kale, stood in a combat training room, watching a human soldier fight a Threxian trainee. The human was smaller but faster, using clever movements and unexpected attacks to gain the advantage. Kale realized the humans fought differently than any other race. They adapted, they learned, and they never gave up. He turned to Carter, who stood nearby. "Your soldiers fight like survivors." Carter smirked. "That's because we are. Humanity has never had it easy. We've fought wars, we've faced extinction, but we always come back stronger." He looked Kale in the eye. "And now, so will you." Kale nodded. He finally understood. This was why the Threxians had come to humanity. This was why humanity would never lose. The first battle. The alarms blared. The Gothran scout ships had arrived. 3 enemy warships entered human space, scanning for Threxian life signs. If they found proof, they would report back to the Dominion. And then the real invasion would come. On board the TDS Valiant, Carter, Valus, and their combined crew prepared for battle. "This is our first test," Carter said. "If they report back, the Dominion will send their fleet. We cannot let them escape." The battle began. Human Phyrexian hybrid warships moved into formation, their upgraded weapons firing with deadly precision. The Gothran, expecting a weak and broken enemy, were caught off guard. Phyrexian fighters, piloted by warriors like Kale, weaved through the chaos, striking with both skill and fury. For the first time in centuries, Phyrexians were not running. They were fighting back. The battle was short but brutal. The last Gothran ship tried to escape, but Carter's fleet was too fast, too prepared. "Target their engines," Carter ordered. A final blast struck the enemy ship, sending it spiraling into darkness. The battle was over. The Dominion scouts were gone. A message to the galaxy. As the smoke cleared, Valus stood on the bridge of the TDS Valiant, looking out at the wreckage. For the first time in centuries, his people had won a battle. Carter stepped beside him. "That was just the beginning," he said. Valus nodded. "Yes, and when the Dominion comes, we will be ready." Chancellor Locke soon sent a message to the entire galaxy. "The Phyrexians are not forgotten. They are not lost. They are under Terran protection. And if the Gothran Dominion wishes to finish what they started, they will find that humanity does not stand alone." The war was coming. And this time, the Phyrexians were not alone. The destruction of the Gothran scout ships sent a clear message. The Phyrexians were alive, and humanity stood with them. Across the galaxy, whispers of the battle spread. Some species were shocked. Others were afraid. No one had ever dared to defy the Gothran Dominion like this. On New Terra, Chancellor Adrian Locke stood before a gathering of humans and Phyrexians. The atmosphere was tense, but there was also a sense of unity. "We have made our choice," Locke declared. "The Gothran Dominion seeks to erase an entire race from history. We will not let that happen. If they come for the Phyrexians, they come for us all." Cheers erupted from the crowd. Soldiers, human and Phyrexian alike, raised their fists. They were ready to fight. But deep inside, everyone knew the truth. This was just the beginning. The Gothrans' response. Far away, deep in the heart of the Gothran Dominion, the news of the battle reached Overlord Kralis, the ruler of the Dominion. The massive alien, dressed in black armor, stood before a holographic display of the destroyed scout ships. His golden eyes burned with fury. "Humans," Kralis growled. His voice was cold and sharp. "They think they can stand in our way." A Gothran general, Zarek, stepped forward. "My lord, their technology is improving. Their alliance with the Phyrexians makes them dangerous." Kralis slammed his fist on the table. "Dangerous? They are insects. If they wish to die alongside the Phyrexians, we shall grant their wish." He turned to his war council. "Prepare the fleet. We will burn their worlds." The invasion of human space had begun. The battle for New Terra. Days later, alarms blared across New Terra. The Gothran fleet had arrived. Thousands of enemy ships, black and monstrous, dropped out of hyperspace, surrounding the planet. The human defense fleet, led by Captain Elias Carter, moved into formation. On the command deck of the TDS Valiant, Carter observed the enemy ships. His face was calm, but his fists were clenched. "They came faster than we thought," Lieutenant Sarah Voss said. Carter nodded. "Then we fight now." Beside him, Elder Valus watched the enemy fleet with cold determination. "No more running," he said. "This time, we stand." The battle began. Human and Phyrexian ships launched forward, firing beams of energy and missiles into the Gothran fleet. The sky above New Terra became a storm of fire. Phyrexian pilots, once refugees, now warriors, struck back against the enemy that had hunted them for centuries. Commander Kale, leading a squadron of Phyrexian fighters, weaved through the chaos. His ship dodged enemy fire, then locked onto a Gothran cruiser. "Fire," he commanded. Missiles streaked through space and tore through the enemy ship's hull. The cruiser exploded, sending debris in all directions. Kale grinned. For the first time in his life, he was not fleeing the Gothran, he was destroying them. On the ground, while the battle raged in space, Gothran dropships broke through the defenses and landed on New Terra. Thousands of enemy soldiers poured out, weapons blazing. On the planet's surface, human and Threxian soldiers prepared for combat. They took defensive positions around the city, their weapons aimed at the invading forces. A deep voice boomed across the battlefield. "Kill them all. Leave nothing standing." The Gothran charged forward. The battle for New Terra had begun. The strength of humanity. Among the defending soldiers was Sergeant James Holt, a veteran of many battles. He stood beside a young Threxian warrior, Tarek, who gripped his weapon nervously. "First time in battle?" Holt asked. Tarek nodded. "Yes." Holt smirked. "Then let's make sure it's not your last." The enemy forces reached the city's outer wall. Plasma blasts and bullets filled the air. Holt fired his rifle, taking down 2 Gothran soldiers. Beside him, Tarek hesitated. Then, seeing Holt's fearlessness, he roared and charged forward, blasting an enemy with precise shots. The battle was brutal. Humans and Threxians fought side by side, refusing to give an inch of ground. A squad of Gothran elite warriors, heavily armored and nearly twice the size of humans, pushed forward. Holt saw them and shouted, "We need heavy fire here." Before the elite Gothran could reach the human lines, a massive explosion tore through the battlefield. From above, Terran artillery rained down, crushing the enemy advance. The Gothran forces began to falter. A turning point. In space, Captain Carter watched as the battle shifted. The human-Threxian alliance was holding. A message came through from a Threxian warship. "Enemy forces are weakening. We have a chance to push them back." Carter smiled grimly. "Then let's finish this." With renewed strength, the defenders pushed the Gothran fleet back, forcing them into retreat. On the ground, the remaining Gothran soldiers, seeing their fleet withdrawing, began to fall back. For the first time in history, the Gothran Dominion had lost a battle. The aftermath. As the sun rose over New Terra, the battlefield was covered in wreckage. Smoke still rose from destroyed buildings, but the people stood victorious. Elder Valus, standing beside Carter, looked around at the exhausted but triumphant soldiers. "We did it," he whispered. Carter nodded. "We held the line." But both of them knew this was far from over. The Gothran Dominion would not accept defeat so easily. Valus turned to Carter. "This war has only begun." Carter smirked. "Then we make sure we end it on our terms." The battle was won. The war was just beginning. The battle for New Terra was over. But the war had only just begun. The Gothran Dominion had suffered an unexpected defeat, forced to retreat for the first time in history. But everyone knew they would return, stronger, angrier, and more dangerous. In the aftermath of the battle, the survivors gathered to rebuild. The city was damaged, buildings reduced to rubble, and fires still smoldered. Medics rushed through the streets, treating the wounded, humans and Threxians alike. Elder Valus walked through the wreckage, his heart heavy. His people had fought bravely, but they had also suffered. Many Threxians had lost their lives, and yet, for the first time in centuries, they had not died running. They had died fighting. Beside him, Captain Elias Carter watched the cleanup efforts. He had seen many battles before, but this one felt different. This was not just a war for survival, it was a war for a future. Chancellor Adrian Locke arrived, his face grim. "We won this battle, but the Gothran will not accept defeat. We need to prepare for what's coming." Valus nodded. "Then we must strike first." Carter raised an eyebrow. "You mean an attack?" Valus turned to face him. "Yes. For too long, The Gothern have hunted us, destroyed us. If we wait, they will come with a larger fleet. We must take the fight to them. Locke considered the idea. Do you have a plan? Valus exchanged a look with Carter. We do. The mission. The Gothern Dominion had many strongholds, but one was more important than the rest, a heavily guarded command station known as Zurich Prime. This station is their main supply hub, Carter explained, pointing to a holographic map. It provides fuel, weapons, and reinforcements to their entire fleet. Valus stepped forward. If we destroy Zurich Prime, we weaken them. We show them that the Threxians and humans are not prey anymore. Locke nodded. A direct attack on a Gothern base. It's dangerous. He looked at Carter. Can it be done? Carter smirked. It has to be. The mission was set. A small but powerful strike force would infiltrate Zurich Prime, sabotage its defenses, and destroy it from the inside. The infiltration. A few days later, a stealth ship, the TDS Shadow, left New Terra, carrying a team of elite warriors, human and Threxian alike. Carter led the team, along with Commander Kale, Lieutenant Sarah Voss, and a group of specially trained soldiers. As they approached Zurich Prime, Carter glanced at Kale. Ever done something this crazy before? Kale chuckled. Not since yesterday. The ship's cloaking system allowed them to slip past enemy patrols, and soon they landed inside a hidden docking bay. The team quickly moved out, weapons ready. Inside the station, the corridors were dark and cold, filled with the hum of machinery. Guards patrolled in pairs, their heavy footsteps echoing through the halls. Using silent takedowns, the team moved swiftly. One by one, the enemy soldiers fell, unaware of the danger inside their own base. They reached the main control center, where Kale and Voss set charges on the station's power core. Carter tapped his communicator. Explosives are in place. Let's move. Suddenly, alarms blared. They had been discovered. The escape. Within moments, Gothern soldiers swarmed the corridors. Gunfire erupted, energy blasts flying in all directions. Carter and his team fought back, covering each other as they pushed toward the exit. Kale, using his agility, leaped over an enemy and slashed through his armor with a plasma blade. Voss fired a precise shot, taking down a Gothern officer before he could call for more reinforcements. Carter threw a grenade, sending enemy soldiers crashing into the walls. Move. Move. They raced toward their ship as the explosives began their countdown. 30 seconds. Voss shouted. The team boarded the TDS Shadow and lifted off just as the first explosion rocked the station. From space, they watched as Zurich Prime erupted in flames, breaking apart piece by piece. Kale grinned. Now that's a victory. But Carter's face remained serious. They'll be furious. Valus's voice came through the communicator. Good. Let them know we are not weak. As the wreckage of Zurich Prime floated in space, one thing was clear. This war was no longer one-sided. The aftermath. Back on New Terra, news of the mission spread quickly. For the first time, the galaxy saw that the Threxians and humans could strike back. Locke called a meeting. The destruction of Zurich Prime has weakened the Gothern supply lines. But they will not stop. They will come for revenge. Valus stood firm. Then let them come. We are ready. Carter nodded. And this time, we won't just defend. We'll keep hitting them until they fall. The war was escalating. The Gothern Dominion had ruled through fear, but now, for the first time, they were afraid. And humanity was just getting started. The destruction of Zurich Prime sent shockwaves across the galaxy. For the first time, the Gothern Dominion had suffered a direct attack on one of their key strongholds. Their enemies, humans and Threxians, had proven that they were no longer prey. But this victory came at a cost. From deep within Gothern space, Overlord Kralis watched the footage of his burning station. His claws tightened into fists as his golden eyes burned with rage. "The humans think they have won," he growled. "They think they are warriors." His generals stood before him, silent. None dared to speak when Kralis was this angry. "They will learn their place." Kralis turned toward General Zarek. "Assemble the fleet. No more games. We will burn their worlds." The largest Gothran armada ever assembled was about to launch its assault, preparing for war. On New Terra, the atmosphere was tense. The people celebrated the victory at Zarek Prime, but the leaders knew what was coming. In the war room, Chancellor Adrian Locke, Captain Elias Carter, and Elder Valus stood over a holographic map. "Our spies confirmed the worst," Locke said. "The Gothran are mobilizing their full fleet. Their next attack won't be like the last one." Valus frowned. "They mean to destroy us completely." Carter crossed his arms. "Then we hit them first." Locke shook his head. "We don't have the numbers to win a direct battle. If we attack their fleet, we lose." Valus tapped the map, pointing to a location on the edge of the Argos Nebula. "Then we make them fight on our terms." Carter raised an eyebrow. "An ambush." Valus nodded. "The nebula's energy storms will disrupt their sensors. If we lure them in, we can strike from the shadows." Locke considered the plan. It was risky, but against the Gothran, playing it safe meant certain defeat. "Do it," he said. "Prepare the fleet. The trap is set." A few days later, the human Phyrexian fleet arrived at the Argos Nebula. The dark clouds of cosmic dust swirled around them, lightning flashing in the distance. Inside the TDS Valiant, Carter stood on the bridge. "Are we sure they'll take the bait?" Kale, now a respected Phyrexian commander, smirked. "The Gothran don't see us as equals. They will chase us into this nebula without thinking." Valus nodded. "Their arrogance is our weapon." Moments later, an alarm blared. Enemy ships were entering the system. "They took the bait," Voss confirmed. Through the view screen, the massive Gothran fleet emerged, their ships dark and monstrous. Hundreds of warships, far more than the humans had faced before. Carter took a deep breath. "Here we go." The ambush. The Gothran fleet moved in, their weapons primed. They expected an easy victory. Then, from the shadows of the nebula, the human and Phyrexian fleet attacked. Hidden warships unleashed a storm of missiles and energy blasts, striking the enemy before they could react. Explosions erupted across the Gothran formation. Several enemy cruisers broke apart instantly. Inside his command ship, General Zarek roared in anger. "It's a trap. All ships, return fire." The nebula disrupted their targeting systems, making it harder for them to lock onto the human and Phyrexian ships. Meanwhile, the Alliance fleet, trained for this environment, moved swiftly, striking and retreating before the enemy could react. In his fighter, Kale led a squadron of Phyrexian pilots, weaving through the chaos and targeting the enemy's engines. One by one, Gothran ships began to fall. A desperate stand. Despite the success of the ambush, the Gothran still had overwhelming numbers. Inside the TDS Valiant, Carter watched as enemy reinforcements arrived. "They're adapting," Voss said. "They're pushing through." Locke's voice came over the comms. "We need to retreat before we're surrounded." Carter clenched his fists. They had done damage, but it wasn't enough to stop the Gothran. Then Valus spoke. "No, we finish this." The Elder turned to Carter. "I have an idea." The final gamble. At the heart of the nebula was an unstable energy core. If detonated, it would create an explosion powerful enough to wipe out the Gothran fleet. But someone needed to get close enough to activate the core manually. "I'll do it," Valus said. Carter's eyes widened. "That's suicide." Valus placed a hand on Carter's shoulder. "My people have been running for centuries. It's time we make a stand." Carter clenched his jaw, but nodded in respect. Valus took a small shuttle and raced toward the nebula's core. The end of the battle. As the Gothran fleet pressed forward, Valus reached the energy core. Activating the controls, he sent one final message to his people. Today, we reclaim our future. Then the core detonated. A blinding explosion tore through the nebula. The shockwave obliterated the center of the Gothran fleet, sending debris in all directions. Inside the TDS Valiant, Carter watched in awe. "Their fleet is collapsing," Voss said. "We did it." The remaining Gothran forces fled, their armada broken. But Valus was gone. The cost of victory. Back on New Terra, the victory was celebrated, but the loss of Valus weighed heavy on everyone's hearts. Kale stood before his people, raising a hand. "Elder Valus gave his life to save us, but his sacrifice was not in vain." Carter looked at Locke. "The Gothran will never be the same after this. Their power is broken." Locke nodded. "But this war is not over yet. The battle was won. The Threxians had their revenge. But the final battle with the Gothran was still to come. The destruction of the Gothran fleet in the Argos Nebula changed everything. The mighty war machine of the Gothran Dominion was crippled. Their once feared empire was weakened, vulnerable. But the war was not over. Despite their losses, Overlord Kralis refused to accept defeat. He still had one last stronghold, his capital world, Gothar Prime. "If they want to end this war," Kralis growled, "they will have to come for me." And humanity was ready. The final mission. On New Terra, the War Council gathered for the last time. Chancellor Adrian Locke, Captain Elias Carter, and Commander Kale stood over a holographic map. "The Gothran are retreating," Locke said. "Their empire is collapsing." Carter nodded. "But as long as Kralis lives, they will never stop fighting." Kale pointed at Gothar Prime on the map. "Then we take the fight to him." Locke took a deep breath. This is it. One final battle to end this war. The plan was set. A full-scale assault on Gothar Prime. If they won, the Gothran Dominion would fall forever. If they lost, there would be no second chance. The battle begins. The human Threxian fleet launched toward Gothar Prime, their ships burning through space like falling stars. As they approached, alarms blared. "Enemy forces detected," Voss shouted. On the view screen, a massive Gothran defense fleet blocked their path. Even in their weakened state, the Gothran were still dangerous. "Here we go," Carter muttered. The battle exploded in an instant. Fighters weaved between massive warships, missiles screamed through space, and laser fire turned the darkness into a sea of light. Kale led his Threxian warriors into the fray, moving with speed and precision. "Target their heavy cruisers first," he commanded. On the ground, assault teams landed near the capital city. Carter, Voss, and their elite strike force moved through enemy fire, pushing toward the Gothran citadel, where Kralis was waiting. The duel with Kralis. Inside the citadel, Overlord Kralis stood tall, his armor gleaming. His golden eyes burned with fury. Carter and his team burst into the throne room, weapons raised. "It's over, Kralis," Carter said. "Your empire is finished." Kralis laughed. "You think I need an empire to crush you?" With a roar, he charged. Carter barely dodged as Kralis swung his massive blade, cutting through stone like paper. Kale attacked from the side, his plasma blades flashing. Kralis blocked, then slammed Kale into a wall. Voss fired her rifle, but Kralis deflected the shots with his gauntlet. He was powerful, too powerful. But Carter had one last trick. He activated his wrist device. A hidden energy charge on Kralis's armor exploded, sending him crashing to the floor. Kale lunged. His blade pierced Kralis's chest. The Overlord's eyes widened in shock. He staggered back, gasping. With his last breath, he growled, "You are not warriors." Then he fell. The war was over. The end of the Dominion. As news of Kralis's death spread, the Gothran forces collapsed. Many surrendered. Others fled into deep space. On New Terra, people cheered in the streets. In the Threxian refugee camps, there was silence, then tears. After centuries of suffering, They were finally free. Locke addressed the people. Today, we have done more than win a war. We have changed the future of the galaxy. Carter and Cale stood together, watching the celebrations. What happens now? Cale asked. Carter sighed. Now, we rebuild. And humanity, once seen as weak, had proven itself as the defenders of the forgotten, the protectors of the lost. The legend of humanity's courage had only just begun.